Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and this is my presentation on Dena, Davis, and deafness. So here's just a quick overview of my presentation, and at the top is the question that I will be addressing during this presentation. First, I'm going to be explaining Davis's argument that parents purposely selecting for deafness in their child is a harm and violates a child's right to an open future. And I will be arguing that instead, deaf culture provides different choices that hold important cultural value. And I'll be explaining that with Sparrow's ideas with the communitarian model. And the reason why this is important is because Dena Davis creates a negative connotation, not just with deaf culture, but with disability in general. And because of this negative connotation, parents will have less disabled children. And so they will have the world will have a loss of culture and overall loss of diversity because of this negative connotation. So before I get into my argumentation, I'm just going to quickly explain what the right to an open future is. It's one of Feinberg's basic human rights. And so children can't fully consent because they are immature and incompetent. And so parents have to make important decisions for their kids. However, children do have rights that are protected now so that they can practice those rights later in life in the future when they do become adults and are able to act autonomously. So, for an example, reproduction. A child has a right not to be sterilized so that in the future, when they do become adults and are able to consent for themselves, they have the opportunity to practice that right to have kids and to reproduce in the future. Here's just a quick little slide about Davis's argument in premise form, and I'll be going over these. So the first premise in her argument is that it is wrong to violate right to an open future. Davis believes that a person is healthy when they are properly able to practice their autonomy and fully give consent. In order to achieve this, the decisions that parents make for their child cannot narrow a child's future life opportunities when they become adults. So when the child does become an adult and have less opportunities or more narrower opportunities, they are unable to make decisions about their life for themselves. And so this makes it so that they are not able to properly express their autonomy. So parents should not force their idea of a good life onto a child. Because Davis relates health to autonomy, decisions that parents make cannot be based on whether or not it creates a better quality of life for a child. Instead, the decisions that parents make should be based on when a child does become an adult, do they have full opportunity to make their own decisions for their life and be the undivided author and director of their life and fully properly express and practice their autonomy? This will become a little bit more clear in the next slide when I explain the second premise with the example of deafness. The second premise in Davis's argument is that selecting for deafness violates the right to an open future. There's a lot of debate about whether deafness is either a disability or a culture, but Davis argues that either way, deafness is a harm. She argues that disability itself is a harm because it narrows choices due to the limitations it brings. So, for an example, a deaf person is unable to communicate with a hearing person unless they have a translator or the person is able to sign. If deafness is a culture, culture itself is also harm because it narrows choices through the rules and traditions that it sets and the people have to follow in order to stay within that culture. So Davis argues that selecting for a child to be deaf will narrow their choices later in life. And some examples are, again, communication problems with hearing people. Many deaf people are insufficient in reading. Deaf Individuals have a narrower job selection, and the jobs that they are offered often have lower salaries than hearing people. And deafness forces the child into the deaf culture and community. And all of these are examples of how opportunities are narrowed when when the deaf children become adults. So for an example, a deaf child, when they grow up, would probably struggle with becoming a journalist and wouldn't be able to become a journalist because they wouldn't be able to properly interview hearing people without a translator, and they wouldn't be able to properly read their articles or even write their own articles. The main point that Davis is trying to make is that when selecting for deafness, the child, when becoming an adult, faces choices without the same opportunities or abilities to express the same level of autonomy as if they weren't disabled or deaf. Now that I've explained Davis's argument, I'm going to be counter-arguing her second premise that selecting for deafness violates the right to an open future. I really agree with Sparrow's idea that disability actually offers important culture and diversity into the world and into human life. And actually, disability offers more autonomy to an individual. More cultures are created when there are more disabilities in the world. Disabilities create cultures that are resolved around those disabilities. When there are more cultures, a person has more cultures to choose from. So therefore, the person actually has more opportunity to express autonomy. The communitarian model states that deaf culture is valuable because it offers choices that include special values of the culture. I don't think Dena Davis should focus about the narrowness of the choices, but instead we should be focusing on the question, what is the point of having many choices if they don't bring value or meaning or purpose to life? Do these choices bring these values to the individual? Do they bring meaning and purpose to the individual? Just like being a quote normal person and not disabled brings choices that a disabled person wouldn't have, deafness and disability as a whole also offers choices that aren't available to a quote normal or non-disabled person. And so, as non-disabled people, why should we assume that we have more choices or opportunities than disabled? For an example, a person in a wheelchair may actually be able to travel a distance faster than a person walking with their own two human legs. It is really dangerous for us to push our biases as non-disabled people onto other cultures and people with disabilities. People value different choices and opportunities. Just because we value something as a non-disabled person doesn't mean that a disabled person values the same thing. And they may want to be offered different choices and opportunities than a non-disabled person. So overall, in conclusion, I argue that disability doesn't actually violate the right to an open future. Choices are still being offered. They just look and value different things than our own choices value and offer. And so just as a quick overview of my presentation as a conclusion, Davis argues that violating the right to an open future is wrong. Selecting for disability is a harm and it narrows choices, and so therefore disability violates the right to an open future. Instead, I argued, with Sparrow's ideas in mind, that disability provides culture and opportunities, and that choices and opportunities should instead bring value and meaning to an individual.